Okay, my name is Dennis Gill with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is 4 June 2023. I am in Reading, Pennsylvania at the World War II weekend. I've got the pleasure of speaking with Michael Hudacek.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you sitting down and talking to us for today. Just give us a little bit of background on yourself. Where did you grow up? Where were you born? Go to school? That kind of thing.
I grew up in Plymouth, Pennsylvania. Still live in Plymouth, Pennsylvania. It's a coal mining town. It's about 4 miles outside of Wilkes-Barre. I come from a family of 9 children. My parents were immigrants. They were naturalized in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. And I did all my education at the Plymouth Borough Schools. I went to the service, come back. I went to King's College, which is from Wilkes-Barre, PA. Then I went to Dickinson Law School, which was in Carlisle, PA. And I was a lawyer for 65 years, a self-practitioner, and I'm now retired.
Okay. You look at you when you talk. What branch of the service did you serve in?
I was in the U.S. Navy.
U.S. Navy, and that was during World War II?
And that was during World War II.
Okay.
I joined the Navy the day of my birth.
Okay. What made you decide to join the military?
Well, the war was on, and I had 3 brothers that were already in the service.
Okay.
And I joined because that was the thing to do my part. Everybody was very patriotic at the time. So rather than be drafted, I wanted to join, and I did join the U.S. Navy, did my training at Sampson, New York.
Sampson, New York, okay. And what was it that you did in the Navy?
Well, I was placed into a unit of about 35 or 40 deep sea divers. And we were a self-contained unit. We had our own trucks, we had our own equipment, our own food, clothing. And the job was that the Navy divers would dive into the seaport the day after it was taken, or 2-3 days after it was taken, to evaluate the amount of bombs, the kind of bombs, and the amount of curtains that prevented the ships from coming in. Then they came out and they dictated to me and to 5 other yeomen who took it down in shorthand because there were no dictating machines at the time. We encrypted those reports, and we had machines, they called them CCM machines, coding machines, and we transcribed them and sent them out to the war room in London. London then would respond and would advise our officers when the demolition squads would be in that port in order to dismember the bombs so that the Allied ships could enter the ships. And that's what I did. I went from one port to another. I was my incident during the invasion was that 10 days after D-Day, I was across the English Channel. Crossed the Channel and followed the army into Cherbourg. They invaded it, and it was occupied around the 16th of June of 1944. After we did our job of deep sea diving and making reports, we went on to the Brittany Peninsula, and we landed in a place called Carantec. And then from there, we came back and went to Le Havre and did a job there. And that was my job throughout France. And eventually, throughout the war, we ended up in Bremen, Germany, 3 weeks before Hitler committed suicide. That was our last port. I was discharged in 1946, May of 1946. And I did some occupation in Germany before I came home. You needed 90 days to get out, and I had 11 points. All those points were because I was over in Europe.
Gotcha. Well, So you weren't a diver yourself, correct?
No, I wasn't a diver.
And what was your duties? What did you do for the team?
Well, I took shorthand with,
Okay.
okay, because they didn't have dictating machines at that time. And we transcribed the reports. The divers would review them, make corrections, additions, and then we took the final report and put it in code and send it off to the war room in London. And then they would respond, and our officers would take over from there.
Do you recall what you thought when you heard about Pearl Harbor? This goes back before you enlisted, obviously.
Yeah, I actually, December the 7th, we had a baptismal of a niece at my home, and my brother, who was a football player for Fordham University, was the godparent of my niece. And it was at that time, around 5 o'clock, that we heard on the radio that Pearl Harbor was bombed. At which point, my brother, who came with 4 other football players from Fordham University, they immediately went back to New York.
Right.
I was shocked.
I'm sure.
I was just a young kid at the time.
Right. What do you recall about? So you were young at the time. You were probably still in high school.
I was in high school, graduated in 1943.
Okay. How about your parents? Do you remember their reaction?
Well, my parents were immigrants and they came from Czechoslovakia.
Okay.
And they couldn't understand what happened and why it happened. Of course, once they left Czechoslovakia, they considered that as the old country and America was the new country. And they couldn't understand why somebody would want to bomb Hawaii, which belonged to America.
Yeah. Were they upset?
They were extremely upset. My parents were upset because they knew that I had 4 brothers and that they would eventually end up in the service. And they did.
What branches were your brothers in?
I had 2 brothers that were in the Navy, and 1 brother was in the Army,
Okay.
who also served in both the ETO and Japan.
Gotcha. Why did you choose the Navy?
My brother was a college, because he went to college by that time when he graduated. In 1941 he graduated, and he was then an officer. And he told me when I was going to join the Navy or join the service, he said, "Do the Navy, at least you'll have a clean bed." But he didn't tell me that I had to keep it clean.
Right. Right. Are there any incidents that stand out in your mind? Anything that you really think about a lot, or?
We did a lot of traveling. We did a number of ports. There were more groups than ours that did other ports, but it was mostly traveling from one port to the other. And we had our own trucks, we had our own food, we had our own clothes, everything. We were considered self-contained. So, but being 18 was easy because I was the youngest of the group, and they couldn't pronounce my name, so they just yelled to me, "Hey, kid." So, but they took care, all the old officers and all took care of me like I was their son.
Right. How were you able to keep in touch with your family?
We had a method of sending letters. I forget what, some kind of email we used to write, and then they would photograph it and send it back home rather than a full mail.
Okay. So, did you get letters from home?
We got letters from home. I was at many ETOs, too many to put on my discharge when I came to New York to be discharged. I remember the typist, he looked at them, he said, you don't need all these ETOs on your discharge, do you? I said, no, just let me go home.
Yeah. How How about your brothers? Were you able to keep in contact with them?
Yeah,
at all? Did you know where they were?
Yeah, no, we didn't. Well, with the one I almost had contact with, my oldest brother, which was the football player, he had a PT built
Okay.
out in the Pacific. The other brother was in the V-12 program for a while, and the other brother was in the Army. He eventually, I got word that he came to Cherbourg. It was or Le Havre, either one, I don't remember. But he was coming over to help finish the war with his group. The war ended, and while he was in Europe, France, I tried to find him because there was nothing but soldiers on the highway that were just waiting to be distributed throughout Germany, throughout France and Germany. But I never did find him. He went out to the Pacific after that, and the war ended before he got there.
Right. How about recreation? What were you doing for fun when you weren't working?
Well, I was stationed at a British port across from the right alongside the channel, and I was friendly with one of the British Navy men, and he and I had the same duty at 12 o'clock until 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. So what happened was he liked to ride horses, so we'd go riding horses. I never rode a horse before that. So he got me a horse, and we just went around visiting. I had occasion to go to London with a group that wanted to go to the movies, and it was a portion of London that when we got through with the afternoon shopping and having our fish and chips, it was around 5:30, 6 o'clock. We were getting ready to go to the movies, and the V2 bombs came over that part of London, and we were pushed into a church basement, and we were in there for about an hour and a half, and the V2 bombs, you could hear them coming over. They whistled, and they dropped, and when we came out, the movie that we were supposed to, the theater that we were supposed to go to was bombed, and it was nothing but all fire.
The theater that you were supposed to go to, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I bet that was scary. What was your favorite country to be in? Did you have one that you enjoyed the most?
At the time, I was in so many countries. I was first in Scotland, and then I went down to London to the HMS Turtle, and then I went over to France and spent a lot of time in France, came back to England, went back over to France, to Le Havre, and eventually ended up in Belgium, Holland, went down into Bremen, Germany, where I spent 3 weeks before Hitler committed suicide. The war was over. So after that, it was a little more peaceful. So went to Denmark for R&R. From there, I went to Nice, France. Then the Navy sent us down to Switzerland, and then I was in Frankfurt on the main river. So we had jeeps, so we just traveled around and saw Heidelberg and places like that.
How did the German people treat you?
The German
Nice?
people were nice people. It was the Nazi people that were nice. But I actually felt sorry for the German people because they lost everything. When I got into Frankfurt, it was so bombed out, it was absolutely devastated. And as we walked down what used to be the streets, there were nothing but photographs of the people that lived in those bombed out buildings. And as a result, I stayed away from taking photographs with cameras. I thought they were worthless.
Because the buildings were so damaged?
Well, the buildings were damaged, but I could see the destruction.
Yeah.
Destroyed all their belongings, their furniture, and all their pictures, which they valued a lot at that time because they had family pictures and they were families at the time. We don't have families today. Since then, I traveled 2.5 times around the world. The best country that I had seen was Egypt. The next best country was Israel. Very historic. But I never saw a country that I didn't like.
Okay. Even during the war?
Even during the war, it didn't matter. It was just destruction, but we expected that.
Yeah. Tell us about your homecoming. What was that like coming home finally when the war's over?
Well, the people, when I came home, I happened to get home into my town of Plymouth about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was walking up the street that I lived on, which was Orchard Street, and it's a big hill. And lo and behold, coming down the street was my father was going to work because he was a coal miner. So he met me and he picked up my sea bag, took me home. He didn't go to work that day. And as far as the people, generally, they were all veterans from my whole street. Everybody was coming home. And most of us didn't talk about our experiences because we just felt that they were so distressing that people just wouldn't understand. So I don't usually discuss what I did or where I was and how bad it was because it's almost indescribable.
Right. Did you discuss anything with your brothers when they came home? Because you guys had all experienced similar things.
Yeah, for a very short time. But we swapped stories for a while, once in a while. But then we got into a business and we got more involved in the business that we were in because it was a produce business and we had trucks and we were hauling produce from one store to another. So everybody went there. Then my brothers started to go to college. I didn't want to go to college, but my mother, she said, "You're going to college." So I went to college, and I was going to be a school teacher, and then I changed my mind, and I went to law school instead.
Let me go back real quick. You said that I asked you about the German people. You said that the Germans were nice people except the Nazis. Did you have much interaction with them?
We knew who they were.
Okay.
Because they were, they had a program, the Americans had a program that if any of the Germans people were walking on the sidewalk toward you, that they were compelled to cross the street and go on to the other sidewalk.
Okay.
And you could tell just by the feeling that we couldn't patronize with people. But we got friendly with them after we were there a little while, and they were very shy, very humble, and when we were able to patronize with them, they were very helpful.
Looking, well, let me ask you this question: Do you ever keep in touch, or did you ever keep in touch with any people that you served with after the war?
No.
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 Never did.
No one. No.
How do you think that your wartime experience had shaped who you became? And changed your life at all?
It made me an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a big change. I grew up fast. And I understood that. By the time I left Germany, I was able to use German conversation. And when I got to King's College, I took up Germany, and the priest, Jesuit priest who walked into the room was going to teach this class. They had about 30 people in there, and I was, of course, the oldest. And he made a remark in German. He says, "Do any of you young fools in here understand German?" And nobody said anything, and I didn't say anything. And he looked at me, and he knew I was older, and he says, "You don't understand German?" And I said, Yeah, a little bit. And he said, do you know what I said? I told him what he said. He said, ah, you were in the war. I said, yeah, I was.
Do you have any regrets about joining the service?
No, I have none at all. It was an era of patriotism, an era of necessity, and just everybody was in the war. So, you know, we did our bit. We knew we had to do it. And we didn't gripe about it. We just went along and did. We were very disciplined during that period of time. You did what you were told, as the difference between today and yesterday. But I don't regret being in the service at all.
It's been said, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, the greatest generation. Do you subscribe to that your generation is the greatest generation?
I absolutely would.
Yeah.
We were a generation who did things, and we were glad to do them. We didn't gripe, we didn't complain. We did a lot of things, and we of my generation refer to it as the best time to have lived, and I don't regret it.
One more question for you. If someone should see this interview in 100 years, what advice would you send them? What would you like them to know?
Well, I think they should learn to read and write and get as much of an education as you can, but above all, travel. Travel is your best education that you could get at any time. I had a school teacher, and I swear that because of the advice and guidance that she gave to me, because she was my shorthand and typing teacher, and she said to me, when she saw me in uniform, she says, Mike, let me tell you something. You don't know whether you're going to go east or west, but if you see a Jeep with the key in it, ask your officer if you can use it, and go and see whatever you could see. This is could be one of the best times of your life. See the world.
Pretty good advice. And you did.
And I did. I've been around the world 2.5 times. Very costly, but I did it.
Well, sir, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime, I want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to tell us your story. And I want to thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.